For nearly 2 decades, he stalked the neighborhoods of Washington, D.C. under the cover of darkness. He was a ghost, slipping through the cracks of justice, attacking women in their own homes, and vanishing without a trace. No one knew his name, what he looked like, or where he would strike next. That is, until 2019, when a shocking breakthrough exposed the man who had evaded justice for over 30 years. This is the terrifying true story of the Potomac River Rapist. From 1991 to 1998, the Washington, D.C. metro area lived in fear of a predator. The man, later dubbed the Potomac River Rapist, was responsible for at least 10 brutal assaults and 1 murder. He targeted women living alone, breaking into their homes late at night, often using blunt objects to subdue them. His attacks were calculated. He left behind no fingerprints, wore no identifiable clothing, and never spoke. But his most horrifying act came in 1998 when he raped and murdered Christine Mirzayan, a 28-year-old intern walking home from a party in Georgetown. She was found bludgeoned to death in a wooded area, an innocent life taken at random, and a community pushed to the edge. Despite multiple victims and evidence collected, the case quickly went cold. Investigators had a DNA profile, but no suspect. They ran it through CODIS, the national DNA database, but there were no matches. Leads dried up, and the case files began to collect dust. For years, the Potomac River Rapist remained an invisible shadow, his crimes unsolved, his identity unknown. Victims moved on with their lives, but the trauma never left. The fear that he might come back always lingered. Then, in 2018, everything changed. Across the country, law enforcement had started using a new weapon, genetic genealogy. It had already helped capture the Golden State Killer, and the FBI wondered, could it work here too? They submitted the rapist's DNA to public genealogy databases, like GED Match. The results came back, partial matches. From there, genealogists built out family trees, narrowing down suspects based on location, age, and family history. One name kept popping up, Giles Daniel Warwick. In November 2019, investigators closed in. Warwick, now 60, was living in South Carolina. Decades earlier, he had worked in the D.C. area as a landscape architect, perfectly blending in, unnoticed. The FBI obtained a discarded item to collect his DNA without his knowledge. The match was conclusive. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of rape and murder. After over 30 years, the ghost had a name. But just as the victims and their families prepared for justice, the case took a devastating turn. In January 2022, while awaiting trial, Giles Warwick was found dead in his jail cell. Suicide. He never stood trial. He never explained his motives, and he never apologized. His death left many questions unanswered, but for the survivors, knowing his name finally brought closure. The story of the Potomac River Rapist is a haunting reminder that even the most careful predators leave behind traces, and justice, though delayed, can still find them. What do you think drove Giles Warwick to commit such horrific crimes for so long? And how did he stay hidden for decades? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. In 1957, a young boy's body was found stuffed inside a cardboard box in Philadelphia, naked, bruised, and abandoned. No name, no missing persons report, no identity. For decades, he was simply known as the boy in the box. The case became one of America's greatest mysteries. Who was he? Who killed him? And why did no one come forward? It took 65 years, but in 2022, forensic science finally gave this little boy a name: Joseph Augustus Zarelli. On February 25, 1957, a college student walking through a wooded area in Fox Chase, Philadelphia, stumbled upon a worn cardboard box lying in the underbrush. Inside it was the lifeless body of a young boy, wrapped in a flannel blanket. He appeared to be around 4 to 6 years old, with blue eyes and light brown hair, malnourished and badly beaten. His hair had been recently cropped, perhaps even after death. The box had once contained a baby's bassinet, sold by a local department store. But that lead, like so many others, went nowhere. He had no identification. No one had reported a missing child matching his description. Police launched one of the largest investigations in Philadelphia history. They fingerprinted the boy, sent his image across the country, posted flyers that read, "Who is this boy?" Over 400,000 posters were distributed. The media called him America's unknown child. Detectives chased down hundreds of leads, adoption agencies, hospitals, foster homes, but nothing stuck. Even as decades passed, amateur sleuths, forensic artists, and online communities refused to give up. The boy's case was featured on America's Most Wanted, Unsolved Mysteries, and countless crime forums. But his identity remained a mystery. Year after year, his tiny grave remained marked only as Unknown Boy. Over the years, numerous theories emerged. One suggested he was the child of a local foster home, possibly abused and silenced. Another involved a mentally ill woman who claimed her mother had bought the boy, abused him, and killed him in a fit of rage. Some believed he was the victim of an underground trafficking ring. Others suspected organized crime was involved. But every lead ended the same way. No evidence, no confirmation, no justice. The case turned cold, but it was never forgotten. By the 2000s, advances in DNA technology gave investigators new hope. In 2019, police exhumed the boy's remains for a second time to extract a more complete DNA profile. It was a long shot, but it worked. Using genetic genealogy, the same technique that solved the Golden State Killer case, investigators uploaded the boy's DNA to a public database. They found distant relatives, and slowly, painstakingly, began building a family tree. And finally, after 65 years, they had a name, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. On December 8, 2022, the Philadelphia Police Department held a historic press conference. For the first time in decades, they didn't refer to him as the boy in the box. They called him by his name. We now know who this child is, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Joseph was born on January 13, 1953, in West Philadelphia. He came from a well-known family, and investigators confirmed his parents through DNA, but they did not publicly release their names, out of respect for surviving family members. Joseph had siblings, living relatives, and yet, somehow, he disappeared without a trace. While his identity was finally restored, one massive question remains: who killed Joseph, and why? As of now, his murder is still unsolved. Investigators have not publicly named any suspects, but they believe someone in the family or community knows more than they're admitting. What's most chilling is this: Joseph was never reported missing. No school, no hospital, no police department ever had his name on file. He was born, lived briefly, and then vanished. Even before his name was known, people across Philadelphia treated the boy in the box with compassion. His grave at Ivy Hill Cemetery was lovingly maintained. Strangers left flowers, toys, and handwritten letters. Now his headstone has been updated. It reads, Joseph Augustus Zarelli, January 13th, 1953, February 1957. He's no longer just a mystery. He's a person, a child, with a story, a name, and a legacy that reminds us how many cases still wait for answers. Joseph's identity may have been hidden for decades, but science and persistence finally gave him back his name. On a quiet December morning in 1992, Christy Mirack didn't show up to work. Hours later, police found her dead on her living room floor, beaten, raped, and strangled. The killer left no fingerprints, no murder weapon, and no trail. The case went cold, until an item as small as a piece of chewing gum cracked the mystery 25 years later. It was December 21st, 1992, just days before Christmas. Christy Mirack, a young elementary school teacher in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, was preparing for the last day of classes before winter break. She was loved by her third-grade students, known for her vibrant personality and dedication to teaching. That morning, when she didn't show up for work, her principal grew concerned. Christy was never late. After repeated calls went unanswered, he drove to her home. What he found was horrifying. Christy was lying on the living room floor, beaten, raped, and strangled with a piece of her own sweater. Her jaw was broken, and there were signs of a violent struggle. Christmas presents lay unopened nearby. The scene showed signs of forced entry. There was no indication Christy had let the killer in voluntarily. Neighbors heard nothing. There was no known stalker, no jealous ex-boyfriend, and no obvious motive. She had no enemies, no dark secrets. The killer left behind semen, and investigators gathered a DNA sample. But this was 1992. DNA testing was still in its early stages. They ran the profile through state and national databases for years. Nothing. Police investigated dozens of suspects, coworkers, acquaintances, former partners. Everyone was cleared. The case stalled. For Christy's family and the Lancaster community, it was a nightmare with no end. Fast forward to 2018, more than 25 years had passed. Detectives refusing to give up turned to the same method that helped crack the Golden State Killer case, genetic genealogy. They sent the unknown DNA to a public genealogy database, GEDmatch. The result? A match to a relative of the killer. Working backward, genealogists identified a suspect, Raymond Rowe, a well-known wedding DJ who performed under the name DJ Freeze. He had no criminal record, was married with children, and had performed at schools and community events. But his genetic fingerprint matched the DNA left at the crime scene. Still, investigators needed hard proof. Police tracked Rowe and watched him closely. At an event, they saw him discard a water bottle and a piece of chewing gum. They retrieved items, both are of it, sent them for testing, and the DNA matched exactly. It was the breakthrough they waited 26 years for. In June 2018, police arrested Raymond Rowe for the rape and murder of Christy Mirack. The public was stunned. A local celebrity known for DJing high school proms and fundraisers was now charged with a brutal, cold-blooded killing. In 2019, Rowe pleaded guilty to all charges: rape, murder, and burglary. He gave no motive, no explanation. Just a chilling silence. Rowe was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Christy's family sat in court, overwhelmed with emotion. After 26 years of not knowing who or why, they finally had answers. Justice didn't erase the pain, but it gave them a name, and finally, a conviction. Christy Mirack was a bright, passionate teacher who wanted to change the world, one child at a time. Her life was stolen by a man who hid in plain sight, playing music at weddings, smiling on stages, and living without a shred of guilt. But DNA never forgets. And sometimes it only takes a tiny mistake, like chewing gum, to bring a killer down. What do you think drove someone like Rowe to commit such a savage crime and then live normally for decades? It was a warm spring day in 1986 when 12-year-old Michella Welch vanished from a public park in Tacoma, Washington. Hours later, her body was found brutally assaulted and murdered. The case stunned the city, but the killer remained a ghost for over 30 years, until a paper napkin and modern science finally revealed the truth. This is the haunting case of Michella Welch and the shocking identity of her killer. It was March 26, 1986. 12-year-old Michella Welch, a bright and responsible 7th grader, rode her bike with her younger sisters to Puget Park in Tacoma. The day was sunny, the kind that made the whole neighborhood feel alive. But Michella was more mature than most kids her age. When her sisters got hungry, she offered to ride home, make sandwiches, and come back. She returned around 11:30 a.m., set their lunches down on a picnic table, and then she disappeared. Police were called later that afternoon. Hours passed. And then, just before nightfall, a search team discovered a horrifying scene. Michella's body was found in a wooded ravine near the park. She had been sexually assaulted and murdered. The park that had once felt safe was now a crime scene, and an entire city was left in fear. Police collected evidence, including DNA from the crime scene, but in 1986, DNA analysis was primitive at best. They had no suspect, no solid leads, and no surveillance cameras to review. Detectives interviewed locals, questioned known offenders, even followed tips for years. But each lead fizzled into nothing. The case went cold. Time passed, technology improved, but Michella's killer remained unidentified. For the Welch family, there was no closure, only silence. By the early 2000s, advances in DNA technology allowed investigators to develop a complete DNA profile of Michella's killer. But still, no match in CODIS, the National Criminal Database. Then came the game changer, genetic genealogy. In 2018, detectives partnered with forensic genealogists and uploaded the unknown DNA to GEDmatch, a public DNA database. They didn't find the killer, but they found a relative. Through careful mapping of family trees, narrowing locations, and matching ages, they focused in on one name, Gary Charles Hartman. Hartman was a 66-year-old nurse living quietly in Lakewood, Washington. He had no criminal record, no suspicious history. On paper, he was a regular man. But investigators needed proof. They followed him to a local restaurant, watched as he wiped his mouth with a napkin, and then left it behind. That discarded napkin was collected, tested, and compared to the DNA from Michella's murder scene. It was a match. After 32 years, police arrested Gary Hartman at his workplace. In interviews, Hartman admitted to being in the park the day Michella was killed. His confession was vague, but chilling enough. He claimed something took over him. He was charged with first-degree murder and rape. The community was stunned. A respected nurse, a man with no prior run-ins with the law, turned out to be a child killer hiding in plain sight. In 2022, Hartman was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. For Michella's family, it wasn't full closure, but it was justice. Finally, her name could be said with certainty beside the words, solved case. Michella Welch had dreams, intelligence, and kindness far beyond her years. Her life was taken too soon, but her memory and her case helped usher in a new era of justice, powered by science and persistence. The man who killed her thought he'd gotten away with it. For 3 decades, he lived free. But even the smallest trace, one napkin, can expose a killer. What do you think drove Gary Hartman to commit such a horrifying act and live a normal life afterward? Share your thoughts in the comments below.